In nearly every seminar I conduct, people ask for the ways they can address and manage unconscious bias in the workplace. Let me take a moment and offer some perspective. Unconscious bias is an intangible state of mind. You can't do an unconscious bias. The only way it is manifested is through the messages we send. These messages become the tangible manifestations of our biases. To begin, let's look at the hierarchy of terms that define this arena and enable us to manage the process and generate the change we desire. There are three levels. First, at the top, and all-encompassing, is the concept of unconscious bias. The word concept is critical, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. The next level, micro-messages, are the actionable and tangible manifestations of our unconscious biases. The third level are the subdivisions of micro-messages. Microinequities, the micro-messages that impair or inhibit the performance of others, and micro-advantages, the micro-messages that enhance and enable others to perform to their fullest. Let's step back for a moment. I categorized unconscious bias as a concept. And as a concept, it is, by definition then, an intangible state of mind. In other words, you cannot do an unconscious bias any more than you can do an anger or a happiness. In order to manage a state of mind, it's essential to identify the behaviors that reveal it. The critical focus, therefore, must be on identifying the microinequities and the microadvantages, which are the visible, audible, and tangible manifestations of unconscious bias. In this arena, then, developing the skill of managing our micro-messages becomes the cornerstone that defines our ability to be an effective leader or colleague. Knowing the history of why we behave in a particular way is interesting and informative, but this may well be a misplaced focus and leave us knowledgeable, yet, in effect, asleep in the fire. How we reach a place is less important than what we do once we've arrived. In other words, how we reach a state of bias is less important than how we go about managing it through the messages we send. For example, I may discover that my unconscious bias toward a particular ethnic group, gender, or nationality was influenced by my Aunt Betty, who grew up in a particular cultural region that disenfranchised a particular group. Interesting, and even informative. But it often leaves us in that warm and fuzzy, touchy-feely zone. And even if I were to take action, it may only result in positive change for that specific disenfranchised group. To truly have an effect on our unconscious bias, we need to move from the informed, conceptual state of mind and focus entirely on the truly actionable components. The greatest impact always comes with addressing the broader issue versus the more narrow, placing focus on the individual elements of unconscious biases toward women, generational groups, racial ethnicities, nationalities, etc., is narrow and limits the accomplishment of the broader mission. One's newly discovered awareness of bad behavior toward women will likely result in a compliant, altered behavior focused exclusively on women. I personally observed a senior executive who was made aware of his unconscious bias in the ways he interacted with colleagues who spoke with a Spanish accent. Once made aware, he complied, adjusted, and controlled his treatment toward Latinos. But he continued sending messages of disrespect toward nearly anyone with a strong Southern drawl. The focus needs to be on the far broader perspective of changing mindset, accomplishing buy-in, creating genuine motivation to change, and making that platform of behavior for all those with whom we interact, and not just for one identified group. Our research reveals there are 5 key factors that have a direct and causal effect on achieving buy-in, the broader impact, and reaches well beyond the conceptual to achieve measurable and lasting change rooted in our unconscious bias. First, setting the platform, the analysis of unconscious bias needs to begin by recognizing that not all of these biases are in fact, and in fact most of them are not, unconscious. As we look into this arena, we recognize that people are fundamentally aware that they have predispositions. There are 3 degrees of this state of mind: unconscious, semi-conscious, and logic-based biases. To truly understand how these function and influence behavior, we need to examine the 8 subcategories as well. These are the experiential or cue-based, implicit, behavioral, class, social,